For months, Ferguson, Missouri has been ground zero in the debate over whether police discriminate against African Americans. Now comes word that a federal civil rights investigation that has concluded that the Ferguson Police Department violated the Constitution. According to news accounts, the investigation found that blacks were disproportionately targeted by police and the justice system. The report is said to include 2 racist emails that were exchanged between police and court employees. The federal probe was launched last September after Michael Brown, an 18-year-old African-American man, was killed by Darren Wilson, a white police officer. The full report will be released tomorrow. And here in the studio to walk us through the federal investigation is civil rights activist Charles Coleman, Jr. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, the August 9th shooting of Michael Brown led to 2 separate federal investigations. Can you walk us through the 2?
Sure. One of the federal investigations was centered directly on Officer Darren Wilson, who, as we all know, is responsible for the death of Michael Brown. And that investigation was led basically to determine whether Officer Wilson violated the civil rights of Michael Brown when he shot him. The other investigation, the one that we're discussing tonight, was focused largely on the Ferguson Police Department, basically looking at systemically whether they were engaged in any sort of pattern or practice in terms of violating civil rights of the citizens of Ferguson.
Well, the report is scheduled to be released tomorrow, and they've already shared some information like racist emails and the use of excessive force. So what are some examples of the emails, and what exactly do they mean by excessive force?
Well, there was one email that referencing President Obama in 2008 essentially said something to the effect of, well, we don't have to worry because what black man do you know keeps a job for longer than 4 years? Clearly pretty strong, pretty racist, pretty bigoted. And in terms of excessive force, there were instances where blacks were found to have been stopped in terms of traffic stops at a much higher rate, kept in prison for longer than 2 days, oftentimes where there was no contraband found. And then additionally, you know, what they were finding was that the municipality of Ferguson was essentially being funded by summonses and warrants and repeated tickets that were being issued to the citizens of Ferguson at an alarming rate higher for black citizens than they were for citizens of other colors.
Will the Department of Justice report will force Ferguson officials to either come to a settlement or face being sued for violating the Constitution? What exactly does this mean for the Ferguson community? And never mind that, what does it mean as, well, not never mind that, but also on top of that, what does that mean for policing on a national platform, rather?
Right, well, there are 2 essentially pathways that you've identified that they can go. The first of which is they can bring a lawsuit against the city of Ferguson, against its police department for these abuses. That would ultimately result in a settlement or a trial where ultimately the relief that would be found would either be monetary relief for people who were victimized unfairly, as well as injunctive relief. And the injunctive relief would be something to the effect of a change in policy, a change in procedure that the Ferguson police officers would have to adhere to. That might include things like diversifying, initiatives to diversify the police force and increase the number of persons of color who are working for Ferguson, along with a number of other initiatives, including additional training, et cetera, et cetera. The second route that they might look to do is to settle this internally, is to sit down with Ferguson police officers and say, or the police department and say, look, these are the things you need to change. And I think that at this point, DOJ really holds the cards in terms of how aggressive they can be in terms of what it is they demand, because this is a highly publicized case. People will be watching it. And I think that dovetails into exactly what you were just talking about. This settlement, I predict, will ultimately serve as a model for police community relations and how policing goes forward throughout the country. The president is watching it. We are watching it across the country. And so how this sort of situation reconciles itself will definitely be of interest.
It definitely will. Well, thank you very much for joining us. That was very interesting.
Thanks for having me.